To the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. Very glad to be here with you. We are now in mid-December of 2023, and I've been thinking about the year in review. 2023, it's been a big year for the UFO or UAP field, and yes, I am aware the year's not quite done, but I look at the calendar and I say, close enough. So I want to um, go over some of the important developments of this last year that we've gone through. Because, in fact, when you really look back on everything that's happened, just a 1 year trajectory, it has been a quite significant year in the history of the UFO or the UAP. And I think it would behoove us to review it here. So that's what I'm going to do here with you. Before I do that, first of all, let me just welcome everyone here that's here with me. I'm always very grateful for your support. If you do support what I do here, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that already. Like the video if you end up liking it. And of course, always feel free to go to my website, richardolanmembers.com, where I keep myself very busy with an amazing group of members of the site. It's really quite a great family we've got there. But having get that out of the way, I want to put a little thought in your mind that we're going to return to at the end. You think of, amidst all of this controversy that has been happening in the UAP field, I'm going to get into it, but we are also living in a world of dramatic transformation. We all know that. You hear it so much, it almost sounds like a cliche, but think about the changes that we are going to be seeing around us and are already seeing around us. Some of the big changes in terms of human society, human relations. Total surveillance of all people by state and corporate entities. It's so pervasive now that we just take it for granted, but this was not something that was the norm in Western societies even a generation ago. But now it is so much the norm. No one really even talks about it, but it's just there. That's one thing. The next is you can see this as well in the financial, economic revolution, technological revolutions, the AI. You're seeing greater and greater dependence by people on the state. You think about it. Talk about UBI, Universal Basic Income, and the fear that many people have of not even knowing how to support themselves in a viable job in the future. This is a genuine fear. And so we see calls for universal basic income. So total surveillance, greater dependence on the state for all kinds of things, greater regulation of your daily activities in every way imaginable. Both of those are what children have to experience. Children are constantly surveilled, and children are constantly monitored and, dependent on their parent or their caretaker. And then on top of that, we're moving into an era where it's becoming increasingly difficult for many to distinguish reality from illusion. Increasingly, we live in our little ideological bubbles. We get the news that's catered and curated for ourselves. And it's becoming difficult, I think, for a lot of folks to get outside of that bubble. On top of that, adding to that is a nonstop barrage of state-sponsored propaganda that a lot of folks in the West, I don't even think they're aware that they're inundated by it. But you are. If you're not aware, you are. We are. So again, that's something that it's a lot easier to propagandize someone if you sort of cut reality out from underneath them and you infantilize them psychologically. We are moving into a society of widespread infantilization on a psychological level. I'm going to submit that to you. Less individual, you could say sovereignty over the self, or at least independence from state authorities. So at the same time, we are seeing dramatic changes in the UFO arena. There is definitely a pressure, a movement to get a genuine, honest UFO disclosure out there. And we also see a tremendous amount of pushback on the other side. that does not want this to happen and will clearly do everything within their power to prevent that from happening. And now, as we move forward into an era in which it seems to me, you tell me if you think I'm wrong here, in which the public is very likely to be less able to deal with the encroachment of centralized state power and a monopoly of truth and this type of thing. We have to wonder, is this our moment? Because is it going to get easier or more difficult to make a genuine UFO, UAP disclosure breakthrough in the coming years? And let us not forget, behind all of it is someone, some intelligence that is acting, operating every single day. You never hear this being discussed in the community. Even among traditional UFO researchers, I don't really hear them talking about this very much. But the fact is, we are inundated with good, very good quality sightings of these craft every single day around the world. And you have to ask, what are they doing? What's going on? What is their infrastructure like? Why are they here? I ask these questions a lot. I'm not hearing this in a lot of other places, but this is very important. We need to know what is going on. So all of this is in the background of our society in revolutionary transformation into something that humanity, frankly, has never, ever had to contemplate before, a complete technocracy. How is that going to affect us? Well, it may not affect us in a psychologically healthy manner. I'll just leave it there. I do probably want to come back to this in future programs. But let's move on. I've got some slides here for you, and I do want to review the year. You're going to see some old news stories, but we're going to do some commentary on them, and then we're going to end this with an assessment of where we are, where we have come, and where this is likely to go. We're going to start with remember the Chinese spy balloons. This was the first big UFO, UAP story of 2023. And yes, it was an absurd farce. It was an embarrassment for all kinds of reasons, both geopolitically. Here's the U.S. accusing the Chinese of sending spy balloons over the country. There was actually, to this day, I've not heard any confirmation from the United States government that this actually was the result of Chinese spy balloons. If you have other information, leave it below in a comment. But and it severely damaged international relations between U.S. and China. It was a serious problem when you really, if you review it all. The Chinese have consistently denied that this was espionage. The U.S. actually sent fighter jets to shoot these things down. Seemed a bit like overkill to many of us. Here's the thing that I want to talk about in the context of the UFO UAP subject. This phenomenon was, these Chinese balloons were consistently referred to as UAP in the media. Now, why would that be? Why would balloons, they're just balloons, be referred to consistently in the major media and also by U.S. defense officials as UAP, when clearly they're balloons? Why would this be done? Well, we don't really have any official answers to that, but I'll give you my own theory. This was an effort by the establishment. Yeah, there is an establishment. And yeah, they have dominant influence over the media to trivialize UAP, to trivialize the subject. You can see exactly where this was going in the beginning of 2023. The idea being all of this UFO stuff that had been coming out in the news since 2017 seemed like it could be very important. The danger of disclosure has always been explosive. And you see here in this news story at the beginning of 2023, what seems to me an obvious, I would almost say ham-fisted, overt attempt to trivialize the UFO, UAP subject by conflating it with balloons. And, it kind of worked a bit when you really go back over the coverage. And in fact, when you go to the next big news event of 2023, which was the Arrow briefing of the Senate, That's the Advanced Anomaly Resolution Office, of course. There's a picture of Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who was, I think he still is technically head of AARO, but he is on his way out. Back in April of this year, he gave a briefing to the Senate on a subcommittee chaired by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. The hearing was focused on UAP, of course, and during this public session, Gillibrand and a couple of other senators were asking questions. Kirkpatrick, this is not even to criticize him, but the fact was he provided very few answers to the many valid questions. One thing he did state very explicitly was that he had seen no credible evidence of extraterrestrial technology flying around in our skies. He did say that. He did present a video of an unknown object that was recorded by a DoD sensor platform in the Middle East. This is the famous, actually, it wasn't the Mosul orb. That was my mistake, but it was very similar to the Mosul orb, which was a genuine UAP captured on video over Iraq in 2016, which was unveiled first by the YouTube channel Weaponize, this Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp earlier in the year. But anyway, there's Kirkpatrick. He's talking to the Senate. He didn't really have a whole lot of concrete answers. The one thing that I will say that you could take away from it that was kind of positive. I mean, Kirkpatrick's contribution was not especially riveting. But Senator Gillibrand, I'm just going to say this, she made a couple of key statements. She did acknowledge that there were advanced craft of unknown origin operating in restricted airspace. That's a very significant thing to hear from a sitting U.S. senator. You know, all you have to do is think back 5-10 years and, you know, imagine just how impossible that would have been to imagine. And here we were in 2023, and this was what she was saying. And furthermore, she stated that the origin of these craft, the operators of these craft, in fact, their very capabilities were unknown. So not a lot of good answers, but a couple of very good statements nonetheless. And you could see, I would say that AARO hearing of the Senate was a kind of breaking point, because it, you know, on the one hand, you see that there was this development of some serious forward momentum. The public was very interested in what Sean Kirkpatrick had to say and equally disappointed in the results of that program. And one definitely suspects that led to the next big story of the year, which was really, I think, the biggest, you know, this along with what followed. And that is the appearance of David Grush into our collective psyche at the very beginning of June. We had the article that appeared in Politico that's often forgotten now. That's the article by Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal that brought this out. But at the same time, of course, the very powerful video interview that David Grush did with journalist Ross Coulthart that was featured on News Nation, and that was incredibly powerful, all of it. So the information comes out. And what was Grush saying? Well, he was a former senior intelligence official, a clearly highly intelligent man. You just listen to him speak, you can tell this is a man with a lot of intellect and a lot of sophistication in how he discussed the matters that he did discuss. So he made these revelations, and he essentially stated that he interviewed more than 40 individuals, many of them high level, some, I think he said Nobel level, like brilliant individuals who had seen evidence firsthand of either acquired non-human craft and technology, or, as he famously said, biologics, that is, alien bodies and alien biology. I mean, it's just an incredible thing to contemplate here, but this is what he said. And he said it in such a powerful manner, it became impossible to ignore. And I mean, the next thing you know, this just dominated not just the news and the UFO community, which it certainly did. I remember clearly what we were all doing on that day. I was at a conference in California, and the entire thing just went haywire, and we changed everything just to talk about that. It was incredibly exciting, but it went beyond that to the world at large. This became a genuine news story that was covered pretty much everywhere. And that, and I'll just point out here, some people found this testimony of his to be shocking, to be, hard to believe, perhaps. Yeah, I understand that. If somebody has not been studying the UFO subject, if you've not been in the weeds, like deep in the weeds for years, I could see that being a very shocking statement. And I have no doubt that many of you listening, you may not be in that category. You may be well acquainted with the subject, but you undoubtedly have family, you have friends, and we all know most people live their lives. They don't really fixate on this subject. So that was shocking. But it must be said that what David Grush claimed in his testimony has been perfectly in line with roughly 50 years of UFO crash retrieval, crash acquisition testimony that researchers have been amassing since really the 1970s, about 50 years, in a major way. I've been an admirer for many, many years of the great late researcher Leonard Stringfield, who, in my view, was the greatest researcher on the whole crash retrieval phenomenon. Stringfield interviewed probably well over 100 witnesses who either directly or, removed one person, had direct experience of a UFO crash retrieval or alien autopsy or things like this. He collected an incredible, meticulous body of work, which, by the way, is available on Amazon. It's a little expensive, but it's still worth it. $100 will get you all of Stringfield's work. I have been recommending it for a long time. There is nothing like what Leonard Stringfield did in his body of research from the 70s through his death in 1994. But in any case, I just wanted to point out that what Grush said is very much in line with Stringfield's revelations and that of a number of many, many other UFO researchers over the years who also have found strong corroboration of claims of acquisition of alien craft. And, you just stop and think about this for a minute. It's one thing to talk about whether UFOs are real or not. Is there something out there? Are we being visited? It's a whole other thing to then go the next step and recognize that your government, if you're an American, has been gaslighting you for an entire lifetime with acquisition of flying saucers, some of them intact from what we have been hearing, and has been engaged in 3/4 of a century of research into subjects such as anti-gravity and revolutionary propulsion and radical material science and all of the other elements that come with the study of a flying saucer from another civilization. Like, all of that has been going on for an entire human lifetime, while they have been saying to you exactly the opposite, that there's been nothing going on. So that's gaslighting, that's lying. And they undoubtedly have people who could defend that policy. I have no doubt they have people who would defend that. But we, the public, we citizens, also have a right to question that, don't we? And so this is the reality. And this is what David Grush did in supporting all of those years of research, essentially coming in from a completely different perspective and stating that this indeed is a real thing. That's a shocker. And I think it was a huge turning point, not just in the year of 2023, which it definitely was, but you could really say in the recent history and maybe even in the long history of the UFO phenomenon, the UAP phenomenon. I would say that it was. That's what it seems like to me. Grush, his testimony led directly to the next big item That, of course, were the congressional UAP hearings at the end of July of 2023. You think about this. This was, how often would that happen, that a new whistleblower comes out and within a month and a half, Congress is actually hearing his testimony in a live session? That, I don't, I mean, there are some of you congressional experts probably listening who could answer this, but I am not aware of congressional hearings being held so quickly after some explosive new testimony such as this. And it's really clear that Grush's testimony from early June led directly to these congressional hearings simply about 6 or 7 weeks later. And this was in itself, these hearings were a very significant event. And let's not forget, by the way, David Fravor and Ryan Graves, who are appearing in this photograph with David Grush. They both were, I think, exemplary in their testimony as well. I mean, they are both, Navy pilots who had their own encounters and knowledge of these UFOs. And they did a great job in talking about it. But Grush really stole the show for this hearing. I don't think there's any question about it. And he said essentially the same things that he said to Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, and Ross Coulthart, but he said it in this case to the Congress. And talking about the biologics. And there was a statement in there by Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett, who in the middle of this declared that the era of cover-ups was over. It was kind of a powerful moment there. Not sure it's true, but it was a very good sentiment to hear. But essentially, Grush repeated his statement about bodies and technology. The real key, though, was that he repeatedly stated that he could not discuss classified evidence that would prove his claims. And he couldn't do it because it wasn't legal. He said, look, I can only do this in a SCIF, that's a sensitive compartmented information facility, highly classified place where you can tell the secrets, and that information would not be given to the public because it would not have been legal for him to do so. There were lots of folks who took a lot of issue with this limitation and Grush's inability to talk about this, but you have to ask yourself, what else could he have done? I can't really see realistically much more that would have been possible. Despite those limitations, I would say Grush made a significant statement on record, and certainly implied, you can even say stated, that the U.S. government has hard physical evidence of ET biological entities. His phrase was non-human biologics have been found. So yeah, that's really quite powerful. One thing that has been somewhat overlooked in the UFO community is that just a couple of days after the hearing, there was a very large posting that appeared on the website above Top Secret that strongly backed up Grush's statements and claims, and that post was then shared on Reddit. Then it was taken down after just a couple of hours. There are a lot of online sleuths and investigators who looked into this, and I'm persuaded by their conclusion that this was a comment made by a Major General John A. Allen Jr., who he's a U.S. Air Force Major General who serves as commander of the Air Force Installation and Mission Support Center in San Antonio, Texas. And it is believed that this Major General put in a very strong statement of support for his fellow Air Force brother, David Grush. And then it was taken down, of course. But anyway, Grush's appearance both in the interviews in June and then in Congress were absolutely earthquake level appearances in the UFO field and in the history of this phenomenon. At least that's how I feel about it. And that led to another very, very important moment in this year. And that is the preparation and the submission, we could say, of the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023, which was written in order to be part of the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, for 2024. It's worth asking, by the way, why UFOs, this subject has to be included as part of the military budget. You could say this is a scientific issue. This is not simply a military issue. That is true. But why is the military dominating this phenomenon in our public realm so much? I would suggest partly because it reflects the domination of our society by military and the loss of a genuine civilian uh, state of mind. I don't really think we're developing that very much these days. But anyway, I'll leave that alone. What did the UAP Disclosure Act, as it originally was intended, what was it meant to do? It mandated, or was meant to mandate, um, identifying and getting together and organizing all government records relating to UAP in order to give to the National Archives for inclusion in like a public collection. It was to establish a UAP records review board that was supposed to be independent, that was to be responsible for reviewing and declassifying UAP records. The review board would have been required to submit regular reports to the president and to Congress, telling everything that they were doing, what they found, what they recommended for further action. This is hardcore stuff. It prohibited the destruction of any UAP records. It had a lot more in terms of deadlines and getting things together. But the main thing that was in it that really, I think, struck fear into the heart of a number of folks was the subpoena power. So the act was meant to grant subpoena power to the board. Well, basically, they were going to request the attorney general to subpoena private individuals to compel testimony, records, and other information relevant to what they wanted. In other words, to force defense contractors to provide them with information about what they had and what they knew. That was really the intent of that. If you are a defense contractor, if one believes the many, many stories of private contractors having access and even control to some degree over this technology, one can imagine how terrifying that would be to them. So that was one thing. And then the other thing was the exercise of eminent domain. And in fact, I'm just going to read, I've got the quote of the original version. The federal government shall exercise eminent domain over any and all recovered technologies of unknown origin and biological evidence of non-human intelligence that may be controlled by private persons or entities in the interest of the public good. That's right out of the original version of the UAP Disclosure Act. Well, as we're going to get to by the end of the year, those provisions would be gone. But let's wait. We're going to come back to that. As it stood during the summer of 2023, this was another a possible watershed in the relationship of the United States government with the UFO phenomenon. This was by far the strongest statement ever to come out of Congress in relationship to UFOs or UAP that we've ever had in American history. There's nothing that even remotely compares to it. And, with that, I will just say on a personal level, I had always been very skeptical of the ability to achieve a kind of true and full, honest disclosure of this subject. I co-authored a book about it 13 years ago. My co-author, Bryce Zabel, and I, it's called After Disclosure. Still, the only really true book-length treatment of the whole disclosure topic. But even then, it was not clear to me that this would be an easy thing to happen. I always described disclosure as impossible and inevitable, kind of a paradox, which it is a paradox in that sense. And at some point, I will have to say the inevitable will happen. This will come out, but when and how long can that be delayed? I think it can be potentially delayed for quite a while. But once the UAP Disclosure Act or the Schumer Amendment to the NDA, as it's often called, once that was introduced last summer, I will admit, I started to wonder, can this make a difference? And then on top of that, the likelihood of additional hearings taking place, which there definitely were rumblings last summer and continue to be rumblings that is the case. So I thought, can this result in some kind of admission? And I will just say, I thought, could be. For the first time ever, I thought this could happen. But I harbored a lot of skepticism, I must say, and I often expressed it at the time, just saying, look, the national security state is not going to walk away from the table here. They're going to keep fighting, and that they have certainly done that. But let's move on, because there's still a lot of drama ahead in the field this year. Stress with the Arrow office, or basically you could say tension between David Grush and Sean Kirkpatrick. That was a very interesting development. And it actually, I think, ended up leading or strongly contributing to the departure of Sean Kirkpatrick from the head of the Arrow office. And just to, remind those of you who may not be on top of this every single minute, that office, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, is a Pentagon creature. It is a Pentagon U.S. military office, and as such has frequently been suspected and alleged to be part of the Pentagon's cover-up of UFOs. And indeed, after Grush made his statements, it certainly seemed to be the case. Recall, back in April, Sean Kirkpatrick's talking to the Senate saying no evidence of extraterrestrial technology. And 2 months later, less than 2 months later, here comes David Grush saying exactly the opposite. And then shortly after that, telling Congress that, this is the case, really making the Arrow office not just looking bad, but looking dishonest or perhaps at best incompetent. And so this was a lot of mud on the face of Dr. Kirkpatrick. He wasn't happy about it. He ended up basically getting into a spat, you could say, with Grush. You've got Kirkpatrick being totally refuted by Grush, and then stating that, again, restating that Arrow had found no evidence to support any of these allegations. And then he criticized Grush on LinkedIn, and that led to a petition calling for his removal as director of Arrow. And you got to think that actually was a big part of what happened. This kind of tension, this is within the defense community here, and I think it really does reflect to the development of what I have been saying all along is a factional war, a factional battle going on between the what I call the insurgent group and the secrecy group. Secrecy group's been around for 70, 80 years. There have always been insurgencies as well, going back to the 1950s. But this is the latest version of that. And I think that is what we were seeing, just how divisive the UAP UFO subject has been and continues to be within the defense community. Next, you've got the NASA UAP study. All of this in 1 year. All of this in 1 year. Ask yourself, if you know any UFO history, what other year had so many developments? Now, in the last 5 years, we've actually had several years that have had big developments, but I would have to say that 2023 is one of the bigger of even the recent years. So here we have the NASA study on UAP. This is a much lower level item than the other things that I've been talking about in general. Nevertheless, NASA, conducted, I guess, you could say a significant study on this subject, basically aiming to understand, principles of these objects, and also trying to get a sense of what NASA's role moving forward ought to be in a UFO UAP collection analysis scenario, basically. So the first thing that they said, though, was they're basically mirroring Kirkpatrick here. No evidence of extraterrestrial connection to UAPs. You really have to ask, what kind of evidence do these people genuinely analyze? It is Uh, I listen to them. I don't get a sense that they really have a lot of knowledge about this subject. Did not seem so to me, and I still haven't seen any evidence pointing otherwise. They did state that some of these UAPs remain unexplained or not easily identified. So they're saying there are still gaps in our understanding of these phenomenon. They recommended, not surprisingly, that NASA needs to play a larger role in all of this, in understanding UAPs. And so, and we need more data. It's always the refrain. Uh, that was actually a very big statement that they made. We need more data. And you heard Kirkpatrick saying the same thing. They're obviously working off of the same playbook, or if not the same playbook, then they just happen to believe the exact same things. The problem with that whole fixation on we need more data, I've talked about this many times, but let me just say it again. This is important. Yes, we need good data for UAP. No one is disputing that. We want as good and positive and accurate data as possible. But I will point out that in 75 plus years of the United States military studying this phenomenon, they have data, and they have collected, in many cases, excellent data. And that includes instrumentation, that includes radar, that includes highly sophisticated instrumentation. Frequently, going back to the 1940s, we have declassified United States government documents talking about objects being tracked in the multiple thousands of miles per hour at altitudes that we were unable to achieve at that time, and that were clearly not natural phenomena such as meteorites or bolides or anything like that. This was the subject of intense analysis going back to the late 40s. If you know your UFO history, you've heard of something called the green fireball phenomenon that took place over mostly the state of New Mexico in 1948, 49, 50. This resulted, in some really incredible sightings, first of all. And the sightings were by high-level national security scientists, including the top meteoric scientists, or at least one of them in the world at the time, Dr. Lincoln La Paz, who was down at Los Alamos and was highly respected and well known. La Paz saw these. His wife actually made a painting of one of them. But what he said directly is that these were not meteorites. These were not anything natural. These objects were flying low, horizontally, silently. They were seen maneuvering. They were seen shooting up at times. They were seen coming down. What were they? So this was something that got the attention of the highest level national security scientists at the time. We still only have a limited amount of information as to what they determined. There was a project at the time called Project Twinkle, which they organized. This was a triangulation project set up with what were called theodolites. These are instruments that could track the speed and altitude and all of these characteristics of aerial objects. And on one occasion that we know of in their report, which they buried in the middle of nowhere, but they captured one object at least that was traveling at ridiculously high altitude and incredibly fast speeds. And I think they measured its diameter at something like 30 feet. It's a flying saucer moving in several thousands of miles per hour. They got it, triangulated it. If that's not data, then we need to have a discussion over how to define that word. But that's just one example. There's so much acquisition of data of this, and yet we keep hearing this tired and untrue refrain that we need more data, need more data. And that was a very big refrain coming from the establishment this year, 2023, on this subject. And it just needs to be addressed and understood for the bogus nature that it is. It's a bogus claim. Leading to the last really big news. Unless the next 2 weeks have something that I'll need to come back to, you never know. But at least as of today, December 12th, essentially, effectively, the gutting of the UAP Disclosure Act, the aforementioned Schumer amendment that I talked about a little while ago. This act removed, it had to go through a process of, the House and the Senate had to agree. I think a lot of folks have understood this by now. I've talked about it a bit the last week in various venues. But essentially, you've got a situation where the Senate offers this very robust bill that was stripped down to the bone by predominantly members of the House and predominantly Republican members of the House. Uh, Connected to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and Huntsville. I think it's Mike Rogers and Mike Turner, and over in the Senate, Mitch McConnell apparently chimed in with more support to gut the act, and so forth. I don't still think of this as a Republican versus Democrat thing, personally. I wouldn't say, I think that could be very overstated, frankly, because you had a lot of Republicans supporting this act, and you guaranteed you're going to have Democrats that are probably as unhappy about the act as a lot of the Republicans. Don't think the Democrats don't support the military industrial complex. They sure do. So I think that would be overstated. But be that as it may, you had a number of leading members of the House and a few from the Senate who were able successfully, because they are powerful, they were able to strip the most significant provisions out of this act. What did they take out? They took out the independent UAP review board. Still not clear to me, by the way, what is replacing that. They've stripped out the power of subpoena, maybe the most significant element of this. And also the power of eminent domain has also been taken out. One thing I neglected to mention in discussing the act initially, which let me just talk about it now, is that it actually explicitly talked about wanting to foster a process of controlled disclosure of UAP. Can you believe it? Incredible. And that also was taken out. Just to think about the whole idea of controlled disclosure. This is something that I personally have talked about for a number of years. It is possible that I used that phrase before anybody else did. I remember using it at least 5 years ago in the early phases of the post-2017 outbreak of information on UFOs. I was talking about controlled disclosure. So it's been out there a bit, but it worked its way into the NDAA for a little while there. It's kind of amazing. But there's still a lot of discussion over what that actually would mean. I developed the opinion, which I still would have, which I still do have, that in the event of a genuine controlled disclosure by the United States government, that this was not necessarily something that you could have a lot of confidence or faith in. We're talking about the United States government, after all, a government that has not shown a lot of good faith on many matters, whether they're related to UAP or anything else that I am able to think about, particularly in terms of the rest of the world. I don't see a lot of good faith by the United States government these days. And so to expect those same people to then be in charge of managing a UAP disclosure process, not necessarily something that I had a lot of faith that would be done honestly or in the interests of the people. It's my opinion. But anyway, it's a moot point. Doesn't matter. It's been stripped out of the bill. There is no formal mention of a controlled disclosure process in the new version of the UAP Disclosure Act. What it does do is that it does still state the Pentagon must provide the ARROW office with UAP data. I'm thinking, big deal. And then establishes a government-wide collection of UAP records. That still is going on. So they still are going to be collecting UAP records. But in terms of public release of this data, the original version of the bill had all kinds of provisions in there and deadlines that would have continually forced the government, to review these records for public release. And, the original version of it was that if a particular document was to be deemed not ready for release, that it would be set aside and up for review on a regular basis with the question as to why will this not be released. Now, that's that's still a loophole that could, in theory, indefinitely allow for the concealment of certain records. It's true. But the fact is, it brings them up for a regular review. And if you are actually engaged in maintaining secrecy on this, that is probably something that would make you a little nervous. Would you really be completely confident that it would never come out? Never. So anyway, that appears to have been removed. There's no formal procedure that I can see in the new act that really states how records will be made public. So it's really lost pretty much most of its teeth. There's, you could say a tiny little bit of something is better than nothing. A couple of scraps that fall from the table is better than completely going hungry. Well, okay, maybe. But it could be a problem if the public becomes complacent and thinks, oh, yeah, well, they passed this UFO thing, and so the government's going to tell us the truth. Well, no, not really. Not really at all. So it's a real problem. And you think about the subpoena power. I mean, the loss of that. What does that really tell you? It doesn't only, clip the wings of the House of Representatives. It doesn't only take away their power. I mean, this was going to be the means by which elected representatives in Congress were going to obtain information from the cabal, from the conspiracy. This was how it was going to happen. So it takes them out of the picture, and it tells us that maybe we're not such of a representative republic after all. Maybe this is the actions that you would expect of a military junta. Just saying. And one other thing. There was a lot of talk over the last few months of the dangers of so-called catastrophic disclosure. Now, what was that? Well, a lot of people were talking about if we don't have control over the disclosure process, it can be catastrophic. And indeed, actually, I would say any form of disclosure is probably going to lead to some catastrophic outcomes for certain interests involved. And in the sense that it will be disruptive, and there's really no way around it. I've always felt that we human beings like to think that we have much more control over situations than we actually do. Do we really control all of this? We like to tell ourselves we do. But my feeling is not so much. You start this process and you just think you're going to be able to control this, where it goes. And I don't think so. I heard a lot of high-level officials and folks involved in this process tell themselves that, well, we can modulate this, we can keep this under control. I don't think so. Once you get past that red line that I always talk about, red line is the admission that there's been a conspiracy of silence and deception. The admission that the government has, or private industry has, intact flying saucers and alien bodies. You start getting into that admission, it then means you are admitting to not just American citizens, but the entire world that the United States government, has lied for nigh on 80 years, if not more, on this subject. Not good for your image. It is not something that's going to inspire confidence. And you can come up with every excuse under the sun to justify your behavior. Well, we were trying to save the public from panic and so forth. Yeah, okay. You can say what you want. Will that really make a difference to a world that's listening very carefully, thinking, another American lie, and a big one, the biggest, perhaps. What's bigger than that? So it's not a situation that is going to be easy to manage once the conspiracy line, the red line. And also the other thing about crossing that red line of admitting you've got alien bodies and technology is, I've said, forgive me if you heard me say this before, but you are living in an era in which you are not supposed to believe in conspiracies. That's considered wrong. No conspiracies. When in fact, we know that conspiracies happen all the time. They're constantly happening. What do we gaslight ourselves when we spout this nonsense and we repeat this nonsense from the establishment that says, no one's in charge. That's the scary thing. There's no one in charge. Well, Some of us would beg to differ. And even if no one's in charge of the whole global system, which we can go back and forth on that, someone's in charge of the UFO cover up. They must be, because there's a UFO reality and it has been concealed. Are you really prepared to believe that only due to sheer incompetence, after hundreds and thousands of military encounters with these objects, countless numbers of encounters where military personnel who encountered these objects were told by superior officers, you shut up and don't say a word or your career is going to be in the tank? Again and again and again and again. You're going to tell me that's simply incompetence and not a direct policy emanating from somewhere? That is a conspiracy. That's a cover-up. And so in an era in which you are not supposed to believe in conspiracies and cover-ups, and in which the biggest conspiracy of all time is acknowledged, well, that's not a particularly good look either for the US or any of the Western governments that are constantly hitting us over the head with a propaganda hammer saying there are no conspiracies. Yeah, it's not a good look for them. So the ability to manage this process is extremely limited. And so catastrophic disclosure. So what I am saying is, just like the whole Sean Kirkpatrick hearing in April of this year backfired and arguably led to the appearance of someone like David Grush to really just give that position the ultimate smackdown, so too the gutting of the UAP Disclosure Act in this NDAA may well also backfire. If they were afraid of catastrophic disclosure erupting, they just may have lit the fuse. So something to think about. Now, as I get toward the home stretch here of this presentation, where are we headed? Well, first of all, let's talk about the outlook for any kind of genuine disclosure. We've got obstacles and we've got opportunities. It's true. Obstacles. You've got the military-industrial complex, which obviously, it is the most obvious thing in the world that they feel a strong need to control the technology that they have. We're talking decades, generations, an entire lifetime worth of anti-gravity research by itself. We know this, by the way. You go back, you look into the history of anti-grav research. The name Thomas Townsend Brown, T. Townsend Brown, comes up quite a bit. His work, something known as the Brown-Biefeld effect, essentially the origin of electrogravitics back in the 1930s and 40s. That far back, Brown in the 1950s had something called Project Winter Haven that does appear to have had some level of success in generating a kind of anti-gravitic lift of a body. And well, it looks like the Navy came in and just took all of that over, and it all went dark by the mid-50s. Where did that research go? Where has it been ever since? Did that end up in the alien reproduction vehicle, the ARV, or maybe in other attempts to reverse engineer these craft? Yeah, I think very likely, probably yes. We don't know, but it seems that way. In other words, what we might want to keep in mind is that the military might be more interested in hiding not the alien craft that Lockheed or Boeing or others may have possession of, but the technology that we have developed as a result of that. In other words, our own ARVs. You have to assume the military does not want China or the Russians to get access to the weaponized technology that they have undoubtedly developed over these years. The U.S. empire is already in a very precarious state these days, not doing well. And so you can imagine they probably would not be excited about giving up any of this information. So that's one thing. Control the technology, control any of the covert advances that they've made over many years in anti-grav or material science or weaponry or any number of other things related to this technology. Uh, Another thing they're worried about is managing their own credibility. I talked about this, so I don't need to belabor it at this time, but it is a significant issue. When you admit to the world that you've been lying, it's a tough thing to get over. And then just more generally speaking, the risk of destabilization. Um, we're talking about a very, very big truth that has repercussions, not simply for our society, but for our entire species. We don't know how the human race will respond to this. Or, to say nothing of these other intelligences that are undoubtedly behind this phenomenon. There's a lot of unknowns here. And you can't assume that the secret keepers here are just cavalierly saying, yeah, sure, we're going to let this out. No problem. I heard the conversation, I think it was on News Nation just recently. I think it was an interview with Ross. And, he was saying essentially, well, if they've got nothing to hide, why would they be obstructing this so much? But of course, the answer is they have everything to hide. That's the obvious statement here. They have everything to hide. This is real. They, whoever they are here. They're operating. Our military knows it. Our intelligence community knows it. Of course they know it. Let's stop gaslighting ourselves here. Of course they know it's real. Of course they have everything to hide. And we still play these little games of pretend all the time in our public discourse, acting as if, oh, well, do they really have something to hide or not? Yeah, well, yeah, they do. They've got everything to hide. So now, as far as opportunities, so there's a lot of obstacles, but there are opportunities also. And one, this is a phrase now I've been hearing. I used it several years ago. Toothpaste out of the tube. Well, it was a phrase that came to me from another individual kind of enmeshed in all of this. He just said, yeah, more toothpaste out of the tube. I put this out there. I've been hearing a lot of folks say it, and it's true, man. Toothpaste is out of the tube. It doesn't go back in. There are attempts to squeeze it back in, but it's not easy. Not easy to put toothpaste back in a tube. So, I think David Grush's statements of this year are probably the most powerful toothpaste that's gone out of the tube. I think the best that the establishment can do on this is to just throw down a wall and block any further advances of this and just suffocate the issue in terms of media coverage and access to further information. I think that's really their best strategy and plan along the same track. I mean, creating a society of more and more controlled and curated information going to the public, and that undoubtedly will help their cause as well. So, but nonetheless, the toothpaste is out of the tube. It's becoming very difficult now to for major media to pretend that there is no UFO phenomenon, that there's nothing significant about this. Like, they can't really do that anymore. Too much has changed. And a shocking amount of credibility has accrued to the UFO research community and the whistleblowers and the very excellent journalists who are getting this information out. Ross Coulthard, Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, Linda Moulton Howe, they're working hard, and many other people, to get this information out to the public. And it's starting to have an impact. So there's that. But then I think the real opportunity, at least in the immediate term, would be future hearings, whether in the Senate or the House. And I don't know that this is in the works, but it does seem to me that there have been rumors about this in the works. Some of them have come to me directly from folks directly in the know, and it does seem to me to be quite likely. Will it happen? Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but it looks like it might. If there are Senate hearings or House hearings again on this subject, the word has been, whether it's true or not is another thing, but the word has been that there is some very explosive testimony waiting to come out. And in fact, we were told more explosive even than what David Grush had to say last summer. Maybe yes, maybe no, but if it's anything similar, well, that would be quite significant. I think we can all agree. Where would that leave us? Well, it would be in a weird position because you could have House or Senate hearings that would have explosive testimony, but you would also have a House and Senate that would be very much hamstrung by the inability to subpoena private contractors, because that's been taken out of the NDAA, and no eminent domain either. So their abilities to, maybe not to investigate, but their abilities to do much about this strike me as very weakened. And I don't know what they'll be able to do, but that won't stop the relevance of further hearings. You'll have a situation where you can see explosive hearings coming out, some kind of important revelation about this that is difficult to deny. The House or Senate being frustrated by their inability to get to the bottom of it. And who knows where that will lead. It will be a very interesting battle for sure. So I think I would argue that hearings are probably the best hope for a genuine breakthrough on the UAP matter in the coming year. Now, keep in mind, we have a couple of other things going on that could easily distract Congress and distract the world. You have the United States backing a war in Eastern Europe that is not going well for it. I realize not all of you agree with me on that, but I'm just going to say it's my very strongly held view after studying that war almost on a daily basis over the last 2 years. I think it's going very badly for the U.S. and for Washington's point of view. And that could be a real problem moving forward on a number of levels. I'll leave that aside for right now. You have economic issues that are a lot of financial experts, far more knowledgeable about this than I am, who have stated their great fears of a genuine financial problem throughout much of the world in the coming year. Could happen. We don't know. There could be a new pandemic. I mean, there's constantly talk about this new strains of COVID or some new thing coming along. Who knows? And then, of course, let's not forget the election coming in 2024, where you can expect the United States simply to lose it. And I even want to think about how bad it's going to get in this country as a result of that. So there's going to be a lot of craziness in the United States in the coming year. Let's not kid ourselves. And where will UAP disclosure fit in that whole mess? Will it be forgotten? Will it, particularly by a House and Senate that will no longer have the ability to do much about it since their powers have been stripped in the NDAA, will they even take this issue on as they currently say? We don't know. A lot can happen in the coming year. So that's just the reality. But nonetheless, it could be that the UFO UAP subject will add its own craziness to the mix of 2024. And it could very well be that a year from now, if we're all here to tell the tale, I'll come back with another review of 2024, even more insane than 2023 was. I mean, I think we can probably expect that. Now, the last thing that I want to say here is what I started with, which is that we are going through a monumental transformation of our species. I have often referred to this as the fourth stage of humanity, looking at the long, long history of our species, where we lived for the longest time as hunters and gatherers, living as one with nature. That's what we did. Spears to animals, you drag it back to camp and you eat it. You build your shelter, real simple living. Hunting and gathering, we did that for hundreds of thousands, actually millions of years. And then we discovered agriculture. Not all at once, but over a couple of thousand years, we learned to plant seeds and, control animals and raise them, pigs and goats and cattle and all of that. That's stage 2. That gave us what we would call civilization. And as I like to say, it was a good run, everything from ancient Egypt to the Renaissance and right up until the Industrial Revolution. You could really see that as a unified unit of human society. Yeah, lots of variations, of course, technological developments and the like, but fundamentally, a very similar stage of human existence. And then we discover science and industry a couple of 100 years ago. That's it. And moving into a completely new formulation of human society and human psychology as well. All of that changed with, the Industrial Revolution and the world of science. And now we are moving to something different. You could say it's a variation of the age of science, but I think it's fundamentally new enough that it really is a separate stage of human existence. We're talking about transhumanism. We're talking about strong AI, like dominant strong AI. We're talking about the complete digitization of human society and centralized control, which I guarantee you those people who have power and influence in our world absolutely want and feel that they need to have. So all of that is happening right now. And we are going through a transformation that we do not have the slightest idea of how it's going to affect us in another generation or two. All of that completely new. And yet we're just going headlong, full speed ahead into this new reality. We should be scared because it is terrifying. It's going to open up a lot of opportunity, and undoubtedly, but it is a change of such dramatic transformation that we must not take this lightly. And I mean, the fact is, what can we even do about it? I don't know. But here's what it's going to result in. As this is what I started this talk with. A, total surveillance and state control. You bank on it. The 24/7 panopticon is already here, and it's only going to get worse. So you, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, for the rest of all time, are going to be tagged and bagged and monitored, minority reported, predictive behavior modeling of everyone, and it's a done deal. Total surveillance state. Ask yourself, what will that do to human psychology? Well, then on top of that, add complete micromanaged control over the global economy. It's obviously happening. Everything's going to be micromanaged. And what will people actually be able to do with themselves? Well, a lot of folks are not going to be able to make a living. They're going to have to rely on a handout from the state. They're going to become wards of the state through BCI. Basic income. So that's going to happen. And so you're going to be monitored 24/7 if you're worthy of being monitored. I guess we can say that. But even if you're not worthy of being monitored, you probably will be. So you're going to be monitored, and you're going to be a dependent of the state or corporate power in one way or another. That's what happens to children. That's a child's psychology. On top of which, a ongoing blurring of the distinction between reality and illusion. I think that's getting worse, not better. Yeah, you've got centralized state governments. They want to be the arbiter of what is authentic information. They are really intent on doing that. But as anyone who has studied the whole last 10 years of the attempt by states to regulate misinformation, as they call it, we can see they frequently got it 180 degrees wrong. Frequently. Don't get me started on all the issues. They've done it again and again. So you're talking about a growing inability that people will have, I think, of being able to distinguish between what is real and what is not real. And that's a really good way to screw with your head, and just to make it even more easy for you to be a target of control and manipulation by the propaganda system that is clearly all around us. So with all of that happening, none of those are good signs. None of those are good. We have at the same time the thing that we never discuss, which is the ongoing presence and activity of some group, or some groups that are not identified, that have extraordinary capabilities, that are traversing our globe on a daily basis, doing something that is important for them, or else they wouldn't be here. It's important. And we need to ask, what are they doing? What are they doing? Are we even able to ask this? This proves the continual need for serious ufology, for serious UFO research. And I'm going to end this program by entreating all serious UFO or UAP researchers out there. If you hear this, and if you are not doing everything possible to research and to analyze what is going on right now with this phenomenon, then all I can say is get to work. We need you now more than ever. The clock is ticking. Our society is losing its ability to be able to work with this subject in any kind of intellectually independent manner without being dominated by a state propaganda system that is intent on maintaining control over its narrative. It is therefore up to us to fight that narrative and to simply seek the truth. That's what it's all about. That's all we can do. You seek the truth. It's not easy. And it's maybe not even 100% possible to get all of the truth that we want. I won't deny it. But that's what we need to do. Well, I want to thank all of you for being here with me. It's been a privilege to be able to speak to you on this subject. Again, I just want to thank all of our friends and well-wishers and supporters who are here. Again, thank you. And please, if you like what I do here, hit that like button, get the notifications. Don't miss what I'm doing. Go to the website, richardolmanmembers.com, and you can get this type of analysis every day, all the time. We got a great community there. Thank you again, everyone. I'll be back soon. In the meantime, let's not forget to keep fighting the good fight now more than ever. Later.